raining. I hope that doesn't. Yeah. Okay, so we're live. Yeah, so we're live. Yeah. 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 Okay. So hi Manny. I think we just start afresh. So hi Manny. Debbie. You can call me Debbie. I'm Deborah Amini, but you can call me Debbie. And yeah, so apologies to everyone joining the live or anyone who watches recording later on. I'm sorry my camera isn't on. It isn't typical of me, but my light is pretty bad tonight and I can't really get it. I can't really get the proper set up. So I guess I'll feel more comfortable speaking with my camera turned off. So I hope you guys don't mind because Manny doesn't mind. So I hope you don't mind.
No, I
Yeah.
do not mind, Debbie.
Yeah, thank God. So meet Manny Silva. So I think I'm going to like read up Manny Silva's bio. So I have it. I have his bio written down in Google Docs because I don't want to make any mistakes. Yeah. So Manny Silva is a technical writer and engineer who has worked at Apple, Google, and Skyflow. He is passionate about creating intuitive developer experiences and founded Doc Detective. Did I just pronounce Doc as dog?
It's okay.
Yeah, sorry. So Doc Detective. Yeah, so he's also the head of docs at Skyflow currently, I guess. Yeah, so he's the head of docs at Skyflow currently, and he's the creator of Doc Detective. Yeah, and he's the codifier of docs as tests. What do you mean by you're the codifier of docs as tests?
I'm the one who put the name to the term and defined exactly what the term meant.
Wow, wow, that's some OG level stuff, Wow. Okay. Nice. That's true. So yeah,
Yeah.
so actually, let me give you guys a quick story about how I met Manny Silva. So on a fateful sunny day, I was scrolling through LinkedIn as usual, and I kept seeing this guy's post. I was seeing money, doctor's test, doctor's test, doctor's. I was like, what? Okay, what's this doctor's test, right? I was like, okay, he's always preaching doctor's test, so. So who's this preacher of doctor's tests? So I stumbled on one of his posts, and apparently that same day I he was yeah, sorry, that same day he was planning to speak at this event. And when I saw that he was actually going to speak about this doctor's test, I've been seeing all over his timeline, all over, they call it timeline on Twitter, I don't know what they call it on LinkedIn, but I guess all over his page he kept talking about doctor's test. And I thought to reach out to him to be very. I was actually curious. I was genuinely curious about this doctor's test because I work as a documentation engineer or a technical writer, and is this something I would like to know, and learn from the boss himself. I mean, he's always preaching about it, so he's very well informed. Yeah. So, and that was how I found myself in Manny's DM on LinkedIn, and we got talking. We haven't really talked a lot. He gives this very serious vibe on LinkedIn. So,
I was
but
so
getting
serious.
yeah. So getting to speak. Sorry, I laugh a lot. So don't think I'm trying. I laugh a lot. Like so, don't feel weird. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, so we got talking on LinkedIn. Although he was giving me the serious side of him, but like I think so far, like in a few minutes we've spoken on this coffee chat, I've I guess he's more of the jovial type, And but initially on LinkedIn, he was giving me this very serious, and I was like, okay, okay. I was being very professional. Yeah. So to cut the long story short, I joined this event where Manny was a speaker, and I stayed through to the end of the event, and I asked a couple of questions. And yeah, the event was his event was, or should I say, his talk was pretty informative, and he had so much knowledge to prefer. Although he was very serious, he was just, and it was adorable. Yeah. So that's aside. So that was how I got to know Manny Silva via LinkedIn and seeing him talk a lot about doctor's test. And I invited him to do this coffee chat with me because I know that many other persons would be as curious as myself to learn about doctor's tests from the boss himself. Yeah. So, so give it up for Manny Silva. So if you're in, so yeah, so if you're in the comment section, you can give it up for Manny Silva. So thank you so much, Manny. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, you got it, Manny. Not a problem.
Mm, yeah,
Well, thank you for having me,
yeah,
Debbie. Happy to chat with folks. Happy to, as you said, preach about Dox's tests. It is, um, my brainchild, even if, or at least the term is, even if
yeah.
there have been people doing strategies that I would consider docs as tests for a long
Yeah.
time. But where would you like me to start?
Okay, yeah. So I think you probably start from telling us about you. I already did a short introduction, but I'm pretty sure I didn't say some aspects of yourself that you probably want to tell the audience. So feel
So,
free.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
So, I, as Debbie mentioned, have been a tech writer for a good long while. Worked at Apple, worked at Google. I'm currently head of documentation at Skyflow. And more than just docs, I also do the UX writing, pretty much anything that isn't marketing that involves words, I own. Um, Additionally, I do some AI work. I built Skyflow's internal AI toolkit from the ground up myself. I published a blog post about it on the Amazon Machine Learning blog, if anyone is curious. But outside of that, I created Doc Detective and Docs as tests because a. I always got really frustrated when I wrote a piece of copy, a procedure, and then I publish it knowing that it was valid and good. And then 3, 6, 9 months down the road, I get feedback that it was wrong. It's like, what do you mean it's wrong? Um, I know it was right. I went through it myself as I was writing it. And they're like, well, this customer says it's wrong. And so, then I have to go and I have to do investigation into the customer experience. I have to talk to engineers. I have to talk to UX designers. And in the end, it's like, okay, yeah, now it's wrong because something changed out from under me. The product changed, and nobody thought to update the docs. Nobody thought to let the docs team know that the docs needed to be updated. And so this was a constant frustration for me. Now, fast forward a few years, I am a father of 3. I promise this is pertinent. And I have 3 boys, and I was on leave after my youngest was born, and I was doing sleep training, trying to get my middle son to sleep well. And for
Wow.
anyone who has done that, it involves a whole lot of not sleeping uh,
Wow.
because people are yelling and screaming, and I'm trying to get them to sleep. But it meant that I had a lot of time on my hands between bouts of dealing with screaming. And so I couldn't listen to an audiobook. I couldn't read a book. It was pitch black. I couldn't do I couldn't do anything that took sequential thought. So I was like, you
Yeah.
know what? I have some coding background. Let me try to tackle this problem. And
Yeah.
this problem of stale docs. And so eventually, by the end of my leave, I had the first version of Doc Detective.
Nice.
And I can go into exactly what that is here shortly, but and that I ended up with a product or a project that didn't have a bucket that it fit into. So I then took a step back and created the term docs as tests to help everybody understand what the heck the project did in the first place and associated strategies.
Mm, that's nice. So would you say your son was your greatest motivator, or would you say your son inspired you, or the sleep training? Would you say the sleep training inspired you to come up with this great idea? Because if I were in your shoes, rest assured that I'm not coming up with anything. I'm
Well, it certainly provided me an opportunity and it was a motivator. I needed to do something to maintain my sanity,
yeah,
something to focus on. So it was good. I'm I can't say that I enjoyed the sleep training, but I have enjoyed the output and I enjoyed the challenge of
yeah.
solving this problem. And frankly, I've spent the last 2+ years continuing to try to solve the problem that is stale documentation.
Hmm. So when you say stale documentation, what do you mean by that?
Stale documentation to me is documentation that was once updated and known good, but after a certain length of time, it hasn't been validated. It hasn't been, you do not have the same level of trust in that doc that you did when it was first published.
Okay.
So, for example, if I were to write a procedure about how, YouTube worked,
Yeah.
and great, I know exactly how that this procedure is valid as soon as I publish it because I just did it. But
Yeah.
then a
Yeah.
year down the road, YouTube changes their UI. They change the button strings.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, well, is this procedure valid still? This was written a year ago. This was written 2 years ago. How much do
Yeah.
I trust this source?
Mhm.
Because it might not be accurate anymore. And
Exactly.
that is kind of expected for like tutorials written by third parties, but it's unacceptable for the product's documentation itself. Imagine if YouTube's documentation
Yeah.
was outdated and it was it was saying, hey, click this button, but that button didn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That would be a mess. And it's, yeah, it wouldn't really tell good on the product that's YouTube in this instance. And okay, so that's a good example or a very good explanation. But then where does doctor's test come in? Yeah,
So,
you've explained stale what stale documentation means. For anyone just joining, Manny and I are discussing about doctor's test. So he gave us like a short introduction about how he was, he had his second son and he had to do this sleep training where he wasn't getting enough sleep because he was like training his baby to sleep. And then he got this inspiration from heaven. Actually, he didn't say heaven, don't mind me. But like he got this inspiration from heaven in quotes, and to build this tool he calls Doc Detective, and he's going to be telling us more about this too. But then he's been preaching a lot about doctor's test on LinkedIn. And if you're a technical writer, a product manager, or a software engineer, this is a very important topic. And this is not just a topic, it's something that you should know, something that you should learn. Because I have attended an event where Manny was a speaker, and I learned like a lot about this doctor's test, and it's actually very crucial for, I think, for every technical writer out there to learn about. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. And I asked Manny a question about what stale documentation was, because he mentioned stale documentation, and I was curious to know what stale documentation is, right? And he talked about, and he mentioned stale documentation is basically any form of documentation that has been written, let's say 2 years ago, the past, and then hasn't really been updated. Like you have links, and then let's say the link was that the link was added like say 2 years ago to that particular documentation, and at the end of the day the user using it in 2 years, what's the should I say proof? I don't know if I'm saying the exact things Manny said, but you get the point. That was the proof that this documentation is updated, the information within or the content within this documentation is updated. Manny will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just bringing you guys up to speed with what we've been discussing so far. Yeah. So back to you, Manny. So please, could you tell us about this doctor's test? So where does doctor's test come in? Yeah.
so docs as tests is a strategy to
Yeah.
take documentation
Mhm.
and treat it as tests for the associated product.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
and so what that means is let's take a step back, actually. There are a lot of docs as types of things in tech writing where we learn something or find tools from an adjacent domain and then apply them to documentation. Like docs as code is probably the best known one. And that is where you get to take engineering tools like version control, Git, uh, but also linters and other such things, and apply those practices and tools to documentation. We've got docs as product, where you get to take product development practices and treat the documentation quite literally as a product, like you would any other product feature, and gain the benefits of seeing it through that view. What Docs as Tests does is it takes the engineering testing practices where they get to test their code, they get to validate programmatically that their code does what they expect it to do. And it takes that idea and applies it to documentation. So, an example is if I had a procedure that said, hey, to do a search for kittens, go to Google in the search bar, type kittens, and press enter. That's something that you could validate. There are a whole bunch of tools and strategies that you can use to apply docs as tests. The docs as tests itself is tool agnostic, but depending on your product's interface, whether it's a UI, CLI, an SDK, an API, there are different tools that you can use to validate your procedures. Doc Detective is a tool that I created. It is open source and free to use that is intended for tech writers. There are all sorts of automation testing tools out there and of automation tools out there that exist, but they're almost exclusively targeted toward engineers. And that doesn't help your average tech writer. Your average tech writer doesn't know how to go in and write an assertion in JavaScript using the Cypress library, using Jest and Mocha in combination with whatever library they so choose. A lot of that probably just sounded like gibberish to some people listening, and that's to be expected.
Yeah.
What Doc Detective does is it simplifies it and it applies it to a documentation domain so that you can take like a markdown file and you can say, cool, here is a hyperlink. Let's test this hyperlink. Let's make sure it's valid. Awesome, it's valid. Next, let's actually navigate to it. And Doc Detective will spin up a web browser and go to that URL to make sure that that the user can go to that URL. Then the next step in our hypothetical procedure is in the search bar. So cool, let's click into the search bar. Let's do a find action, click into it, the browser does it. And then type kittens and press enter. It types the string kittens and it presses the enter key. Congratulations, you've just validated that your procedure can be run as written. And then now that you have this test for it, you can have a computer run it again on a schedule. You can have it validate however often you want it to be validated so that every day when you wake up, you can have a report that says, cool, all your procedures are accurate today still.
Okay, because I was very good point there, because I was going to ask, you mentioned the fact that you can create a documentation today, and let's say in 2 years time, particular link might not function as intended, right, for your audience or the users. So I was going to ask, can this procedure in with Doc Detective, can this procedure be automated? So in such a way that while users keep using my documentation or the documentation I create for my company, can it be automated in such a way that I don't have to worry about whether one link is working or whether one package is deprecated or stuff like that? And can it just be automated? And then you mentioned scheduling the procedures, right? You can schedule how often you want to, but does it require me clicking a button? If I schedule it, does it happen automatically, or does it require me doing some form of activity?
That depends on how you set it up. Doc Detective is very flexible because every tech writer has a different process and procedure that they have to do to get their docs out the door. And so Doc Detective itself doesn't run the schedules. But say if you're using GitHub and you have access to GitHub Actions, you can run Doc Detective as a GitHub action. And so you can just say, cool, every day at midnight, I want you to run the Doc Detective action against my documentation. And then if there's a failure, it can fail the step or it can fail the action. That way you can say, oh, hey, there was a failure. Let me go see what's wrong with this morning. But you can also run it on your own device while you're writing documentation or reviewing documentation so that you don't have to rely on running it in the cloud somewhere. You can run it on your machine locally. And then it's like, cool, I know this is accurate. Let me push the tests out with the documentation. And then
Okay.
your GitHub action can just continue running it on the schedule with all of the new tests you just wrote.
Cool. Makes sense. So yeah, so you've I think we spent like the past 10 minutes talking about Doc Detective. So okay, so let's come back to the topic of discussion for today. That's docs as tests. So I'm pretty sure that many persons that joined this call are very curious to understand in layman terms what docs as tests is and how do they carry out these docs as tests as a technical writer. How do they carry it out? Yeah, so in
So
layman, yeah.
docs as tests is a way of testing your documentation. And it is a general strategy, and there are lots of ways to apply it. Doc Detective is just one of them. But the short version is first, you need to identify what sort of product area surfaces you're documenting. Does your product only have a graphical user interface, like in a web browser or a native app, like Windows or Mac OS app? Does it have an API? Does it have a CLI or SDKs? What sort
Yeah.
of procedures have you written? And then once you identify what your surface is, what your procedures test, then you can find an automation tool that lets you test those.
Like Doc
It might
Detective,
be
right?
one of them, but say if you have APIs, then you could use something like Postman. If you
Yeah.
have SDKs, you could do something where like MongoDB has done for a while, where you can write a unit testing script for your SDKs
Yeah.
and then just run that on a schedule as long as the script matches your procedure. Like, oh, hey, top to bottom, this
Yeah.
100% matches the documentation and
Mhm.
this is runnable as written, then you know your docs are up to date. MongoDB takes it a step further and they use a tool that they developed themselves called Bluehawk, to where their script for their
Yeah.
SDK procedures is their source of truth. And then they use Bluehawk to extract snippets of their testing script. And then they directly embed those snippets in the documentation. So it is literally a one-to-one match between their testing script and what they show in their docs. And that is a docs test strategy because they are still testing literally the documentation.
Okay. So you mentioned something that was quite interesting. Yeah, so I use Postman, and I'm pretty sure there are tons and thousands of developers and tech writers that actually use Postman to test the APIs you're documenting or the APIs they're working with. So in terms of API documentation, why should I'm using myself as an example here. So why should I switch from using Postman to using Doc Detective for testing my docs?
Sure. So first, let me talk about what Postman does well.
Yeah.
Postman makes it really easy to, in a collection, chain together a series of API calls.
Yeah.
And that is legitimately wonderful. And they're the first, like, I won't say that it's the absolute easiest thing to do in the world, but there's going to be some barrier of entry to APIs, let alone API testing.
Yeah.
But essentially, you can create like directory or a collection that maps to an API-based procedure, just end to end. Let's say you have 3 API calls. You create a resource, you get the resource to validate that it has the values you created, and then you delete the
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah.
Cool. You can do that. And you can do it all within Postman. And that's great. But it's all limited to being within Postman. And if you're not, and one of the things that Postman doesn't do well is validating the outputs. You can validate that the inputs are what you expect them to be,
Yeah.
but the outputs might change, and that wouldn't fail anything.
Yeah.
Whereas it might be a breaking change to some of your customers. What
True
Doc
that.
Detective can do is you can create an equivalent test that goes top to bottom, runs those 3 API calls. But if, say, one of the outputs of one of those calls changed, then Doc Detective can flag that. and let you know
Yeah.
and say, oh, hey, last time you ran this command, this was the output. But this time we're getting this. There's a discrepancy here that you need to
Yeah.
investigate. But additionally, kind of like what MongoDB does with Bluehawk,
Yeah.
Doc Detective lets you save the outputs to file. So then you can then, instead of having to write up the output in your documentation and hopefully not have copy paste errors, because those happen, you can just point your docs to say, hey, here's the output file for this command, and it works.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of
Additionally,
sense.
additionally, Postman, again, everything happens in Postman. But one of
Yeah.
the nice things about Doc Detective is that you can write your tests in line with your documentation, so that instead of having to write your docs and then move over to Postman and write everything there and make sure that it's
Yeah.
actually matching,
That's very cumbersome, actually. Very stressful.
for Doc Detective, you can write your procedure and then in the same file,
Yeah.
write a comment that defines a test for that action, and then continue on with
That's
your
cool.
day. That way, if you have to update the procedure again, you don't have to go somewhere else, not even in another file, to be able to update the test to match the content that you just wrote.
Wow. So are you saying I can run Doc Detective on the documentation I'm writing? I don't know if I'm getting the picture correctly.
Yes.
So let's say I'm creating this documentation. I could run docs. I could run the Doc Detective. How? Can you give me an instance? I wish I could even see like a demo, because I'm actually very curious about how Doc Detective works. Yeah, because yeah, it's pretty stressful. Like leaving where you're doing and then going to Postman to type out that same parameter. It's very stressful actually. So I think if you could probably like do a demo. I don't know if you prepared your screen for that, but if you didn't, it's fine.
I did not, but give me just a sec.
Okay, fine. Yeah, maybe we could be talking about something else before you. So yeah, I saw your bio and I was like, wow, I was blown. You've worked at Apple, you've worked at Google, as you worked at Google for almost 5 years, close to 5 years, according to your LinkedIn, as a senior technical writer. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So like, how was your let's just digress a little bit. How was your how should I put this question? Your journey, how was your journey as a technical writer, right? I don't know, should I use was or is? You're still a technical writer, right?
I
So
am a technical writer.
right,
And
okay,
I
so
am a
how's your
technical writer
journey?
first. I like to think of myself as tech writer by day, engineer by night, because Doc
Mhm.
Detective and Docs as tests is
Yeah.
my hobby. I do it outside of Skyflow.
Okay.
Uh, like I use it at Skyflow. They're very happy to have me use it at Skyflow, but
Yeah.
I do it on the side.
Okay.
Um, my journey as a technical writer
Yeah.
has been an interesting one. I was I've always been good with tech, and I was lucky enough that my mother and godfather taught me how computers worked and how to put them together when I was young.
Nice.
And then when I got older, I discovered I had a knack for English.
Mm.
And I am unfortunate in the fact that I don't have a knack for pretty much any other language. I've tried. Um,
Same
but
here.
but I was like, okay, cool. I've got tech. I've got English. How do I
Yeah.
knit those together? And I found tech writing, and I've been here ever since. And
Nice.
out of my I studied both professional and technical writing and creative writing simultaneously.
Oh,
You might
wow.
be able to see I'm a big fan of fantasy
Wait, you studied it. Sorry, you studied professional writing.
and creative writing at the same time. Yes.
Like you went to school for that, or you like took a course?
Yeah. So I did my undergrad in I'm trying it. My undergrad is a degree in English with a concentration in professional and technical writing and a minor in creative writing.
Wow. Okay. Nice. They don't offer that. They did not offer that at my school. At my university, I actually studied computer science. So I was when you said you studied, I was like, wow, people actually do that. They study technical writing. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
It's
Yeah.
becoming more of a thing slowly.
Really?
Um, But yeah, then I went to work for Apple, working on the FileMaker database product for a while. And while I was there, I got my master's in technical communications.
Wow.
And then a few years after that is when I went to go work at Google, and I worked in the business communications division there and helped found a developer relations team.
Nice.
And then a buddy of mine from Google moved over to Skyflow, and I followed him a few months later, and we've been here since. And
Wow.
going from big company to startup was a bit jarring, but
Imagine.
it very different cultures in every place, and that's to be expected. But it's been a journey, and I've discovered that I enjoy the boots on the ground nature of startup life. I need to be doing. If I'm not I don't like slow paced things.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person where I have to have 5 plates spinning at once or I'm bored.
Wow. You're like you're one in a million. Is that the right term to use?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry, I was trying to say like you're very rare, like a rare type, because for what you said, and then I said you're one in a million, and that's like, so one in a million is the term people use to like appreciate someone's beauty or something like that,
Mm.
or yeah, or something nice, right? But I guess
Yeah,
that works too. Yeah.
I have been told I am an atypical writer. Yes,
What does
and
that mean?
I love it. I embrace it. Um, but I like the challenge. I like the nature of every day being something different. I like, not knowing what I'm going to be
Yeah.
doing next.
Yeah, same
And
here. In terms of yeah, sorry. In terms of not knowing what I'm working on next, I like that. I don't think I can do jobs where jobs that do not require creativity, or jobs that do the same thing, or monotonous tasks or something. I'm pretty exhausted, so I keep stammering. But you get the point. So like I prefer jobs that keep me on my toes, but still that does not mean I like doing like a million things at the same time. No, 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 that's not my forte. No, no, no. You won't find me doing that. No. In fact, I'll be pretty frustrated if I find myself doing a million things at the same time. Like I'll run mad, literally. But yeah, in terms of creativity and not doing the same thing over like any job, and I think technical writing allows me to do that. But with the emergence of AI now, I think most persons' creativity are like going down. But let's not digress, anyways, because I have like, if I was to go into the topic of AI, would still be yeah.
yeah, it's a big thing, and I have a lot of opinions and experience in that too. So, topic for another day. But
Yeah, exactly.
I can show you a little bit of Doc Detective.
Okay, cool. Nice.
So let me share my screen.
Right.
Okay, yeah, let's share the entirety of this screen. Cool.
All right, let me add it to stage. Cool.
Okay, so this is my VS Code instance. Don't mind all of the mess at the moment. Now,
Okay.
I ask your forgiveness because some of this test is going to be broken because I just updated my docs this past weekend and I haven't updated this test file yet.
Oh, that's fine.
But the way that it works is there are a few ways of writing Doc Detective tests. One
Okay.
way, like I mentioned earlier, is writing it inline. So we've got this markdown. Okay,
Yeah.
it talks about some of the format of the old Doc Detective
Yeah.
content, and if you write all of the tests in line, it might look
Yeah.
something like this. Cool, start of a test. Cool, for this hyperlink, I'm going to run a check link action to this URL. And we can do that for each of the hyperlinks. But oh, actually, this one, I want to go to that link. And so it'll spin up a web browser. And let me see if, and then, oh, here's the screenshot. And so actually running it looks something like this.
Oh, quick question. Quick
Yeah.
question. So, Docs Detective, this approach would only work if you're like doing the Docs as code approach, right?
No, actually, and I'm very glad you brought that up. Docs as tests and docs like code are complementary, but docs as tests does not require docs as code. There are ways that you can write tests for content that lives in a CMS, for
Okay.
content that uses data,
So
for
static site
content.
generators.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you can write or you can do docs as tests for any documentation format. You might need to get a little creative, but you can do it.
Okay. Cool. I'm curious. I'm curious as how that works. But okay, go on. Yeah.
So, and I'll touch on it when we get there. I'll show you a little bit. So
Okay.
here we've got a few different components to the command. Doc Detective just runs via an npx command or a node command.
Okay.
Npx doc-detective run tests is the sub command, and then the input file is the just path that you want to test. I'm
Yeah.
passing in this file here
Okay.
and go. And so what's going to happen is it's going to take this input file, it's going to parse it and detect all of the tests there. It's going to spin up a web browser, and it's going to fail to find the page. There we go. And done. So I had to manually navigate to the page that it was looking for, again, because I updated my docs over the weekend.
All right. Okay.
But what happens is you get a big output of all of the tests. So let me open up this JSON file and we can see exactly what happened.
Yeah. Sorry. One more quick question. This whole scenario, is it just for Doc Detective, or would your documentation live within the same folder as Doc Detective? I'm still trying to get the whole.
So it does not have to be, you do not have to install Doc Detective if you don't want to. Doc Detective can be downloaded and run by NPM at runtime.
Okay. Okay.
You can install it if you want.
Yeah.
It is not a requirement. But Doc Detective is flexible in that you can
Yeah.
point it to documentation that lives anywhere and it'll work as long as it's on the local file system or accessible via URL, a public URL. Then
Okay.
it will either fetch the URLs and run them locally, or it will run against your local content.
I think
So
my question was, where would your document, for instance, let's say I'm writing my documentation using Markdown formats, and you're writing it via VS Code.
yep.
Would my documentation have to live within, using this instance you're showing me right now? So would my documentation have to live with in the same folder as this doc content? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no. Doc Detective, you can point it to wherever you want. So right now I'm working in the samples directory, but I could put it in source and just pass the proper path to the file. I can put it wherever I want. And Doc Detective will go out and find the file and run against it. You do not have to move your documentation at all.
Okay, so all you have to do is just point to the file that contains your documentation.
Yeah, or also the directory. So if I wanted to run
Right.
all of the files and tests in the samples directory, I would just pass in the samples directory and Doc Detective would do the rest.
Wow, that's cool, because I kept thinking about the amount of work I have to do if I'm writing tests for every single.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, makes sense.
Well, and right now I just passed in this I parameter, but there's a Doc Detective configuration file where you can set your default input command,
Okay.
where you can set your default command that you want to run, like run tests. So
Okay.
if you configure it well, then you can have the entirety of what you have to run just be not there, npx doc detective, and that's it. And then it'll read your config. That config will point to where your documentation is and everything
Yeah.
else you wanted set up, and it does it for you.
Okay. Okay, makes sense.
There now, looking at the test results, we've got, so this only says it failed because again the URL wasn't updated, but you can look in and see, cool, for this entire test specification, which is a group of tests,
Yeah.
we have individual tests that are run against different contexts. In this case, it was run in Chrome, but we also support Firefox and Safari for
Yeah.
web UI tests. And it was run on Mac. Cool. This checklink action passed. This one passed, and you can see which URL it checked. This one failed because I didn't update the URL, and we're going to see that a number of times. That's the only reason it's failing. But we were able to open the URL. We were able to find the element on the page, an H2 that had an ID of fields, and it had the literal text fields. So you can make sure that not only does an element exist, it has the text that you say it has. You can click it if you want. You can do all sorts of different things with it if you want. And then it turned around and it saved a screenshot and to this file, which you can see is right here.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. Okay.
As far as APIs, it might look something like this. So this is another way of defining tests just in a JSON file. You can have your tests defined inline like here, but you don't have to. And so here we have the exact same steps just in a JSON object. So here I want to run a check link action to make sure DuckDuckGo responds. And here, oh, hey, I want to make an HTTP request to an API endpoint. Here's the URL. Here's the method. This is the request data that I'm passing in. So that literal object, and then response data makes sure that the API responds with at least this.
Yeah.
And here are the appropriate status codes. So that might look, or that would look something like, let me just copy this.
Yeah, feel free. Copying and pasting is not bad. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah. So, one of the situation where I have like a tutorial or a code example, a code sample within my documentation, and I want can Doc Detective also spot, like, let's say packages that are deprecated, or check if the code still runs, or can it do something like that?
So Doc Detective has a run shell command. So it can come in and say, do I have an example for this right now? Yes, Docker. So you can pass in pretty much any command you would run in a terminal to run shell. And so like here, we're saying, hey, we're going to run Docker hello world. And we're going to make sure that it includes at least the output of hello from Docker. It can include more, but here we're just going to do this and the hello Docker spec, copy, paste, and it is going to take a sec. It's going to spin it up, and then it'll give us our response. And so here we can say, yep, it output hello from Docker and a whole bunch more. But we ran the command. It exited with a clean exit code, and it included the string that we expected it to include. So the step passed. So as long as you can run the command, then you can have Doc Detective validate it. Doc Detective does not do things like, cool, I have a big NPM or I have a big node project, and I have dependencies that I'm going to rely on a node level. That thing. That's not what Doc Detective can do. But if you have like an SDK, or you have a tutorial where you're asking users to write a file that does something, like you have a whole bunch of JavaScript or a node project, then each and every command that you ask the users to perform, Doc Detective can validate. And so it might be like, cool, users write this script with these commands, and then you have a script with those commands, and then run it, and then you pass in a run shell command, the exact same thing you're asking your users to do, and Doc Detective will tell you if it passes or fails.
Okay, makes sense. So what about a situation where, for instance, I'm using like a static site generator to create a documentation, or let's say CMS to create a documentation? How do I use Doc Detective in such scenario?
So
I think that's like the last question I have.
For a CMS, it depends on exactly what sort of CMS you're dealing with. If you're dealing with something where, you're writing and like it's rich text markup, like it's a WYSIWYG editor, what you see is what you get, that sort of thing. Then Really, what is required is I see your question, and Doc Detective is written in JavaScript and TypeScript, moving over to TypeScript slowly as I go. But the sorry, I lost my train of thought there. CMS. So for CMSs that don't allow you to have content or export content to the output, then you need to write something in JSON that mirrors the procedures that you're writing in your CMS. And you store those wherever you need to store them. But for something like a CCMS, where you're doing data, where you're managing individual components and you have access to the XML schema under the hood, then you can write these inline steps just like we saw over here. And just instead of markdown syntax for a comment, you use an XML syntax for the comment. And then when you output your final results, it can still have the test statements in it. And so you can take that result and run it against Doc Detective to make sure that it's valid as written.
Okay, cool. So what does this apply to a situation where I'm using static site generators as well?
100%. Static site generation has nothing to do with how you write your content. It's just how you serve your content. Like docdetective.com is built with Docusaurus. Docs-as-tests.com is built with Jekyll. I have Doc Detective tests on both of them. And what I do is just as a check before I merge something, I have the Doc Detective tests run. And if they fail, well, I don't merge the updates.
Nice. So you're using your own tool. Cool.
Yes.
That's nice.
And I'm using it extensively in Skyflow too.
Wow.
Skyflow is a data privacy and security company. And one of the big reasons to do docs as tests in the first place is that every time the documentation is wrong, every time it is broken even the slightest bit, then it is a bad look for your company. It degrades customer trust in you and your product. It makes it more likely that existing customers will churn, and it makes it less likely that new customers will onboard.
Yeah, very true. It plays a huge role in user experience and what's the word? Customer retaining customers. Yeah, I think we're both hungry because we're like forgetting stuff. I haven't had dinner and I'm just imagining the fish I'm going to have this night. So yeah, I think we should start wrapping up. Yeah.
Cool. Well, there are a lot of resources available to anyone who's interested. So there's docsastests.com, which is a blog where we tackle tutorial where we have tutorials on how to apply docs as tests with various tools, not just Doc Detective, including an example of how to do it in CI with GitHub Actions. We have doc-detective.com, which is the documentation for Doc Detective.
Could you docs-as-test.com, could you repeat that? I want to share the link in the comment section for everyone to see.
Yeah, just docs as tests all run together .com.
Yeah, it's not open. Or maybe you should I don't know if I'm let me go to docs as tests. Probably didn't spell it correctly. Oh yeah, I've gotten it. Yep. Okay. So what's the other link you mentioned?
Doc-detective.com.
Okay, doc-detective.com. All right, cool. Okay, cool. So yeah, go on. You can go on.
Yeah, that's the documentation for Doc Detective itself and how to use it. And there are also links to the GitHub pages. Both Doc Detective itself and the Doc Detective documentation are fully open source. So if you want to contribute, you are more than welcome to
I'd
join
love
the
to.
community and do so.
Yeah, I would love to contribute.
There are links to the GitHub pages from the doc site. Also,
Yeah.
join the Discord server. It is free. It is open. Join us.
Mm.
That's where we have conversations about what people are working on next, so that
Oh.
we don't step on each other's toes. But yeah,
Are
please.
there refreshments? Are there refreshments in this channel?
And the
So
last
like
link I
we need food. You need to get our attention with food. So you guys
well,
should think about that.
maybe I can get your attention with AI, because on the Doc
Okay.
Detective doc site, just
Yeah.
earlier this week, I added a new Ask AI button that is aware of all of the Doc Detective documentation and our
Oh,
GitHub repos and can answer questions about what Doc Detective does and how to use it.
oh, cool, 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 cool.
But yeah, lastly,
Okay.
there is I am writing a book on docs as tests.
Yeah, going to share
And
that.
yes. And that is going to be coming out next year is the current plan. No, I don't have a hard timeline on exactly when, but it's going to go much more in depth into what what docs as tests is as a
Yeah.
strategy, and
Mhm.
the theory of applying it, and how various different work groups and companies have applied different flavors of docs as tests over the years.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. So y'all, you guys should click on the link and join the wait list so you can be one of the first persons that get notified once this book is published. You don't want to miss out. So, yeah. Yeah, cool. So the link is also displayed on the screen, so you can also see it. For those that watch this recording later on, you can also go to the link. It's displayed on the screen. So yeah. So Manny, do you have any in quotes last words for this conversation?
um,
Yeah.
if there's anything you want to have Doc Detective do that it doesn't today, join the Discord, leave GitHub issues, let us know. We're an open community. We want this to be a tool that works for everybody. So please join. You are more than welcome. And let's build tooling that helps everyone be confident in their documentation.
That was an astounding. Yeah, God, I'm so hungry. Astounding speech. Yeah, but seriously, that was cool. Okay, so y'all join the Discord channel, get active. I'll be joining the Discord channel myself, and I would try as much as possible to contribute to Doc Detective. I mean, I want to be part of this too. How old is Doc Detective?
Let's see. My youngest is a little over 2 now. So Doc Detective is a little over 2 now.
Nice. So if I join now, in 10 years from now, I'll be like one of the pioneers.
Yep, more or less.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So you see me there, and trust me, I'm going to come with my vibe, and I'm going to ask for refreshments. So get ready.
Maybe I'll ask what the AI can do for you.
Right? Oh no. No, 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 we don't do that here. Okay. It was really fun chatting with you. This was a coffee, this was meant to be a coffee chat, and we didn't even have coffee.
Yeah,
What
neither
time
one of
is
us.
it? What time is it over there?
Lunchtime.
Oh, okay. So you can't have coffee by alone. Like it's not, it's also like 7:53 p.m. here. So I can't be having coffee by this time of the night. So yeah. So all right. Thank you so much, Manny. We'll continue our conversation on LinkedIn. It was really nice doing this with you. And thank you everyone who attended. And for those that was just recording afterwards, you can follow Manny on LinkedIn. I think his full name is Manny Silva. So you can search Manny Silva on LinkedIn and give him a follow. And of course, join the Discord channel, the Doc Detective Discord channel, and be a part of this great tool, right? So see you guys later in my next coffee chat episode.
Thanks for having me,
Manny,
Debbie.
have a lovely day. Yeah. See you.
Have a good night
Bye.
and enjoy your
Bye
food.
for now. Yeah, you too. Bye. Yeah.